So if you understand what those things are, then all of a sudden disease becomes optional. You can truly decide, diabetes, cardiovascular, all this stuff. It becomes your choice to have it or not have it. And that to me is so clear because I've done it myself. I've reversed the 6 or 7 conditions I've had, and it's been, almost 5 years now, and they have not come back.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Schuster. Food for the brain, knowledge from the experts, tools to win at life. I'm your host, Dr. Richard. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, and whatever you do, this is the show that is going to help you become the best version of yourself. Each episode, you will hear from some of the most amazing, talented, and successful people on the planet who followed their passions and strive to help others. Join our movement to get 1 million people each day to commit acts of kindness for others. Together, we're going to make the world a better place. Are you ready? Because it's time for your Daily Helping. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Daily Helping Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard, and we have a brilliant and fascinating guest to share with you today. His name is Kashif Khan, and he is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the DNA company, where personalized medicine is being pioneered through unique insights into the human genome. This is really, really cool stuff, and I can't wait to share this with you. They've done the largest study of its kind globally, and the DNA company has developed a functional approach to genomic interpretation, overlaying environment, nutrition, and lifestyle on the genetic blueprint to create personalized and deterministic health outcomes. The DNA company has been featured in such media outlets as Business Insider, Yahoo Finance, and ABC News, among others. And Kashif has made it his mission to build the DNA company into a business that has an impact, whose success is measured not in dollars earned, but in lives improved. Definitely resonates with the mission of this show. Kashif, welcome to the Daily Helping. It is awesome to have you here.
No, it's great to see you again, Dr. Richard. A pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited about this. Offline, we've talked a number of times, and I totally geek out to stuff like this because I think this is the future of medicine. So before we get into all the really cool things that your company is doing, I want to hop in the time machine and let's find out your superhero origin story. Tell us about your journey and what ultimately put you on the path you're on today.
So, it's interesting because I don't come from the space, came from a very different industry. And like most sort of functional medicine stories where you find people that end up looking at root cause medicine, it usually starts with their own health. Usually it starts with self-discovery and being failed by whatever system. And that's what happened to me. So I had, eczema, psoriasis, migraines, acid reflux, depression. There was more. These are just the things that I can remember, and each one of them was being treated as a separate problem with a separate doctor and a separate cream or a separate pill, right? And after they kept stacking and stacking, I realized I wasn't getting rid of anything. I was just adding another problem with another solution, and my pill box just got bigger and bigger. And I wondered, why is it all happening now? So I'm 42 now. I was 35 at the time, and I was sick for a couple of years. And that's when I stumbled across a friend who started to dove a little deeper with me into my genetics, who was studying it himself as a practitioner. He's a doctor himself. And that's when I learned that all these symptoms and all these things I was feeling were all connected to a central hub. There was like a system failure that was happening. And it was in that discovery that I realized I could make them all go away. I didn't need to brand or consider myself to have these various things. And that started to happen. And I haven't been sick since then. I don't even get a common cold anymore because I'm so healthy. So in learning that, I literally walked away from my business, which at the time I was in the PR and marketing world. I used to help companies grow. I gave the company to the staff and said, thank you. You built it. You keep it. I found what I have to work on. And that's what I did. And we built a DNA company.
It's always fun when people come on the show and they basically compress, major transitions in their lives, or these companies they built, like, oh yeah, giving it to the people. Let me build a DNA company. But I want to go back. Yeah, even further, how did your early upbringing influence what you're doing? What was that like for you too? Because I think that's so fascinating for people to learn and important to really understand, your why as well.
Yeah, so I grew up, just witnessing illness. My dad was sick. He was older. So he was sick as far as I can remember. There was a lot of, there was addiction around me in terms of my uncles and cousins. I had a cousin that passed away when we were in our teens. Uh, it was suicidal again. It was all a mental health thing. And there's more, like I can go on. So I experienced so much of it that it was so normal. And when I left that space, I moved from Vancouver to Toronto and didn't know anybody and started working with business people, like entrepreneurial peers, and saw that this wasn't normal. You don't have to be sick all the time, which is what I saw around me all the time. And I started to discover, which is why I had the friend, Bryce, who, ran a clinic, because I started to dive into that world, not for myself. I didn't do it for myself or help myself, but I just was learning. So it started from sort of being born and raised in this, an immigrant family, quite poor, struggling, and everybody was sick, right? Because nobody understood you didn't have to be.
And I love that. I love that context because it's been an ever-present theme in terms of who you are and your mission and what you're doing. So what I want to do now is, we've kind of we're enticed, like we're dialed in. This is really cool stuff. But I also want to take a step back, kind of a higher level explanation, if you will. So ELI 5, I learned that on Reddit. That's a thing. So let's talk about DNA and how it impacts people. Let's do a very high level overview, sure, because everybody knows we're genetically predisposed for certain things, but a lot of times we may go to the gym and we're killing ourselves, but we don't lose weight, or we think we're eating right, but then we have a heart attack, right? And then we hear about stuff like that happening. So let's do DNA 101, and then we'll dive down from there.
So that's actually what intrigued me was, as an entrepreneur, why did I actually not only help myself, but shift gears towards building this company? Because even genetics was broken when I discovered it. And what I mean by that is the genetics 101 is genes are only available for us to identify genetic conditions, meaning you're born with a gene variant that directly equals and causes a problem. So it's things like sickle cell syndrome, you have it, right? And then you have to work on developing a genetic therapeutic that tries to turn that switch on or off, and it goes away. Meanwhile, 90% of our healthcare budget, our $4 trillion healthcare budget, 90% of that is spent on chronic disease. You're not born with diabetes or cholesterol problems or breast cancer. All this stuff happens later in life. And it happens because you have to make those wrong choices or mismatched to your genetics for that many years or decades even to cause that inflammatory load to get that sick. And this gap didn't exist in genetic science. So what I found was that, again, genetics 101, you can have a gene. A gene is an instruction. It tells your cells what to do. There's 57 trillion cells in your body. All of them are being instructed by your genes. It's literally a human instruction manual, right? It's your blueprint. Some of those instructions are wrong. There's spelling errors in them. So because of the spelling error, the instruction is slightly off. Could be to your benefit or to your detriment. Could go either way. So that function you're doing slightly different. Well, there's more than just spelling mistakes. There's entire paragraphs could be missing in the code, or you don't even have the gene. Forget about what variant, we literally didn't get it. So then that leads to a suboptimal profile. But the gap was that at that time when I discovered this, you would get outcomes like, hey, you got an 80% chance of Alzheimer's because of this gene variant that puts you into a profile. All that does is give you anxiety for the next 30 years because you don't really know, like, what does that tell me other than maybe you're getting Alzheimer's? It's higher risk. We're putting you in a bucket. Well, aren't you also telling me that 20% aren't going to get it with the same genetic profile? So you're taking the most personalized thing I have and depersonalizing it. You're taking my human instruction manual, my blueprint, and telling me maybe, instead of actually telling me. So that's the gap. And what is the gap that we worked on? So what we learned was geneticists study genes. They study the science. They don't study people. They don't study conditions. They don't study health. They study illness. So our question was, okay, this gene variant points to 80% chance of Alzheimer's. Why did 20% not get it? Let's study those people. Let's study health. Let's understand what their habits were. And that's what we landed on, that your genes will point to propensity, like you said, predisposition, right? The difference between yes or no are your environment, nutrition, and lifestyle habits. What load are you putting on those genetics? So you could have a beautiful Ferrari, right, parked in your garage, amazing car, but if you take it off-roading, it's going to fall apart. You could have a Jeep in your garage, which off-roading is no problem, but try and race a Ferrari, it doesn't work. That's what environment, nutrition, lifestyle is you're wired for this. You're not born sick. You were born healthy for the most part. You should stay healthy and die healthy unless you do things that are mismatched to what you were designed to do. Environment, nutrition, lifestyle. And we're not the same. We're different. That was the big thing, the light bulb that went off, that, wow, we can take genetics from you're born with sickle cell to let's prevent diabetes, let's reverse Alzheimer's, let's reverse cholesterolemia. And we started to do that. So that's taking it from genetics 101 to what we call functional genomics. How do you actually apply this to the big problems?
I love this. One of the things that was always fascinating to me were twin studies. When we were in graduate school, and they would, plenty of studies that if you took two identical twins and they were genetically predisposed for a psychotic disorder, schizophrenia, and you put one of those twins in a nurturing environment where they had access to good quality food, a low stress environment, loving family, and you put the other one into, using your words, a suboptimal environment where there was constant stressors, the quality of food was poor. The child A, who's in the nurturing environment, might not ever develop any of the features of schizophrenia, where by the time the kid is child B, by the time he's 19, is going to have full-blown psychotic episodes, and then they start the regimen of the antipsychotic medication, and that kid has a label and a much more challenging road than the one who's in the other place. So this is like, research that I've seen that is like flying off the page and being applied not just to a few people in a lab, but potentially everybody everywhere. And I think that is remarkable what you're doing.
And that's where, in the research side, that thinking of like what you just described with the twins, that's what demotivated researchers and said, well, genetics doesn't really play a part in this stuff, right? Because we had two twins with the same genetics, but one got it, one didn't. And they failed to recognize that you had to understand the environmental exposure that led to the issue. But somebody else with different genetics with the same environmental exposure may not ended up with the same problem. So there's two parts to the equation: is here's how you're wired, here's what you're designed for, and here's what you're doing with it. That's when you can take this probability based, you got an 80% chance of something, to a very certain this plus this equals this. And that's what we've been working on.
So let's talk about that, because I'm sure people are listening to this saying, well, I want to know how I can be in that 20% with respect to certain conditions. So is it as simple as breathe clean air, eat clean food, and get good sleep? Like what are the nuts and bolts of this?
So the basic things we already know, the things that we should be working on. There's some things that are counterintuitive that you wouldn't even think. For example, there's some people that we have to tell them that they should never do cardiovascular exercise. It will actually give them heart disease, which no clinician would ever say. That's, again, going against the grain of what's that one size fits all, right? There's some people for whom we tell them you would be an excellent vegan, and where some people will say that being a vegan is the one thing that will make you sick, like right away. So understanding the biochemical processes, right? When you become a vegan, what enzymes are required to break down those foods? Genetically, do you actually do that or not? Those types of questions. Then you can start to map out, here's how you should eat. And I can give you a simple example. So if I go back to the cardiovascular example, because I will paint a picture of, why it's not one size fits all, and how different genetics can lead to different outcomes. So there's something called oxidative stress, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, which means that, so all of the cells in your body take in nutrition and oxygen to create energy, right? They're constantly striving to create energy to keep you alive. And they're trying to stay healthy, and they're trying to get not inflamed, because that inflammation is a root cause of disease. So there's a gene called SOD2, SOD2, which is responsible to support the mitochondria by clearing oxidation. Because that reaction of creating energy happens in the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. So it's literally a little power plant in the cell that's creating the energy. In the process of taking oxygen to create energy, you also produce oxidants, which are toxic. So the same oxygen which gives you life is slowly aging you and killing you, right, as you use it. If you are the person that has the poor SOD2 that doesn't do this job very well, which is very easy to determine, then all of a sudden you're a marathon runner who is putting yourselves under a high load of oxidation because you're getting into high cardiovascular activity beyond normal human capacity on a regular basis. While this thing that you can do well, which is clearing oxidative stress from the cell, you're just creating an additional load that you can't handle, right? So it's kind of like if you could have a fireplace that's functioning just fine, and then what if you have one where the chimney's blocked? The fireplace is running, but all the soot is just piling up and piling up and piling up. And that's what it looks like when you don't clear oxidation from the cell. So for that person, who's very easy to identify, we would tell them, do not do cardiovascular activity. Especially you can compound that and say, okay, of the oxidation that you do clear, well, now it gets into the bloodstream. And we have to look at another set of genetics to determine how well you detoxify sort of the toxic insults in your bloodstream. And that's very easy to genetically determine. So if you have the combo of poor SOD2, poor glutathionization, the ability to bind and send toxins to the liver to metabolize, then we would even more so say you should never do cardiovascular exercise. Focus, go ahead and sweat, do your weight training, but just don't breathe heavy, right? That could be the source of, and now why, the last thing I'll say, why heart disease? Because heart disease is rooted in inflammation. And we can genetically determine in the arteries, what quality of hardware do you have? There's some people that have stainless steel, can handle anything. You see grandma smoking till she's 95 and you wonder why she has no issue, right? And then there's some people that get a heart attack when you see these Olympic sprinters and these soccer players that drop dead at 35 with a massive heart attack. They are the profile that I'm talking about, where they can look fit, they can look healthy. There's no warning sign you can't feel inflammation, right? In certain areas. So if you have that combo, bad oxidative stress relief, bad detox, and bad hardware in the arteries, well, that's where you're going to get the inflammation caused by that toxic stress. And then your body is going to try and reduce the inflammation with cholesterol. Then you're going to get a blockage. And if you're doing this, at a high level, it may happen earlier in life. And then boom, you get hit with a cardiovascular event and you'd have no clue where it came from.
Hey guys, Dr. Richard here. For the past 7 years, I've been privileged to bring you incredible guests who are changing the world and can help you become the best version of yourself. I'm really excited to share with you a new quiz that I created based on my clinical training that will curate for you a custom list of my top episodes and actionable strategies to help you wherever you are on your journey. All you need to do is go to drrichardschuster.com to take it, and it's 100% free. You'll be taking the next step on the journey to unlocking the power of you, and I can't wait to see where you'll go. So I'm thinking about the poor vegan marathon runner listening to this now, questioning if what they're doing makes sense. But no, it's interesting because you're talking about essentially these variables compounding over time. Yeah. And what I love as I'm listening to you is that all of your analogies are very easy to understand. The fireplace with the soot, and so essentially, it's identifying these things, but. Knowing is great. Like, right, we can do things and we can say, oh, okay, so, I don't have stainless steel, I think was the analogy you used, hardware in my cardiovascular system. But how do you go about reversing the damage for somebody who's finding this out 35, 40, whatever it is, and say, my God, I have been doing all of the wrong things, eating all of the wrong things. how do you fix it? Especially
Yeah.
if those paragraphs, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you had mentioned earlier there could be misspellings or paragraphs that are missing entirely in your blueprint. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, exactly. That's the key thing, because none of this means anything if you can't do anything about it. Right. That's why you hear people say, I don't want to know my DNA. I don't want to know if I'm getting Alzheimer's, because it's like, oh, I prefer to live happily. Right. But what we're saying is that's step one. Step one is identifying risk. Here's what your risks are. Step two is now knowing, because you identify the risks, not at a mathematical level that you got an 80% chance of something, but at a biochemistry level. Here's what you're not doing well. Now you know what to do about it. Right? If you're in that disease state, if you have I'll give you an example. We had a 38-year-old, and I'm using the same example just to put color to this context, right? 38-year-old pharmacist who had a crazy cholesterol issue that was on Lipitor, and it just wouldn't go away. Even though he was taking Lipitor, it kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. So when we looked at his genetics, we found the exact profile that I just spoke of. Bad oxidation, bad detox, bad endothelial, that inner lining of the blood vessel, which is where the blood actually flows and touches. That's what the hardware we actually looked at. He had the bad quality inner lining, so it's more prone to inflammation. So now, and the other thing he also had, which I didn't mention, is a poor methylation. So your body's actual now that we know the inflammation is happening because of what I spoke of, your body should deal with the inflammation through what's called methylation. He also didn't do that well. So he had a 4-tier, bad combo. So then we looked at, okay, you could have all of this, but if you live on a beach somewhere and have no stress and sleep well and, eat fish out of the sea, you're not getting sick. You weren't born sick, right? It usually happens in and around the age of 50, 55. Then by 60, you have like 2 chronic conditions. Then you spend the last 15 years of your life in treatment. That's kind of the American dream, right? So why did it happen to him at 38? What triggered it? Well, he was golfing 4 days a week. What happens when you golf? You're breathing in pesticides and chemicals for 4 hours at a time. That especially in Canada, in Toronto, where he lived, that has a long winter. So, there's even more work required to keep that golf course so beautiful. So for 4 days a week, 4 hours at a time, he was exposing himself to all these toxic chemicals that he couldn't clear. He didn't have the ability to get rid of. So they're free flowing in his blood, causing that inflammation and damage, which leads to the cholesterol being deployed. The other 3 days, he added on tennis because he thought that exercise should help reduce his cholesterol issue, which exaggerated it because that cardiovascular output was the root cause of his problem, right? So he had a sort of double whammy, 4 days of toxins, 3 days of high oxidative stress, and he couldn't understand why the numbers kept going up and up and up, even though he was taking Lipitor. So with him, the intervention was interesting. It's not about take this pill, right? It's about how do we get you off a pill. So the intervention was a few-fold. It was habit change. So we had to teach him how to exercise differently. He wanted to stay fit. We said, you have to focus on resistance and weight training. Go ahead and hit the gym hard. And his hormones also spoke to this. So it's no coincidence that this is what his ancestors did, right? His hormones looked like he was designed to be doing that, pushing heavy things. So we moved him to that. We also gave him some supplementation to help him with those things that he didn't do well, clearing oxidation at the mitochondria, glutathionization and getting rid of toxins from the bloodstream, reducing inflammation. We then also worked on his diet to some degree because we looked at his ability to metabolize fats and it wasn't the best. So we adjusted his diet a little bit. And it took, I think it was 5 or 6 months, but he got off the pill. He doesn't have a disease anymore, right? Because he never did. That disease of cholesterolemia was his body trying to use cholesterol to reduce all the inflammation he was causing. So the disease was actually, he had no ability to detoxify all those toxic insults he was dealing with. That was the true root cause. So we dealt with that. And coming back to my example of, I was saying that central hub that points to all these spokes of problems, right? The problems are your body screaming to you saying, dig deeper, look, why is this happening, right? You waited too long. But of course, if you don't have that instruction manual, it's nobody's fault that you were making the wrong choices. You're doing what everybody else does. You didn't understand that it needed to be personalized. And that's all that happened to him.
I love the example. He didn't have a disease. The disease was a response to inflammation in his body. because they had that
Yeah.
perfect storm of those four things going wrong. Is that, and I know everybody's wired differently. Somebody who's been dealing with this issue for 60 years is probably going to have a longer course to get back to baseline than somebody who's 25 and says, "Oh, I've discovered this now." But I did want to ask you something different, because I've been seeing a lot in the media about CRISPR and people editing their genes. So talk to us about that, how that plays into this. I've seen horror stories, right? I've heard of people, playing around with this who have no business playing around with it, and then they're really in trouble. But talk to us about what the future of all this looks like. And I want to add this piece. What you're talking about is so radically different than how the entire healthcare system is constructed. We treat symptoms, we don't address root causes. And you're talking about the identification of root causes in installing things that prevent the disease from manifesting in the first place. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about gene manipulation.
Sure. Well, I mean, when you talk about the healthcare system, the key word there is system, meaning that we have one way of doing things because we do such a good job of acute care, meaning that break your arm, get some terminal disease, you need to run to the hospital and get fixed. We do better than that than we've ever done. The problem is that same toolkit is applied to chronic disease. The same training, the same thinking is, okay, go do whatever you want, eat what you want, do what you want to your body, and when you're broken, I'll fix you. That's the medical system, as opposed to understand how to not get sick, right? Or understand why you got sick. The question of why is rarely asked and is often, it's responded to as, well, we don't know. That's not what we do here, right? So it's not, it's a system failure. We use the same toolkit applied to chronic disease, but chronic disease is not like acute stuff, which you really do have to resolve the pain point. You break your arm, you got to put a cast on it, you got to fix it. You're not going to figure out your calcium levels, et cetera, at that time, right?
Right.
So, but all these chronic diseases is no, you got to figure out why, because that's you've just waited too long. That's what the chronic disease is. And this is why things like CRISPR also still aren't looking at genetics in the chronic disease world. CRISPR is going to do a brilliant job of getting rid of genetic conditions. It's going to be a huge win for humanity because we're going to have all these things, like, for example, Down syndrome, sickle cell, which I talked about, some rare forms of autism where you have it, right? It's in your genetic code. It's part of the instruction manual. You have it. And until someone can turn that switch off, you will continue to have it. That's what CRISPR can do. It can literally take your DNA, splice a section that you don't want, and either replace it or just reconnect without that portion. And now all of a sudden your code has changed, right? The challenge right now is, how do you take that and get it to manifest through the entire body? So you've watched these, sci-fi movies of somebody takes a shot and they turn into a giant werewolf and their bones start cracking and popping. And how do you get that to happen, right? How do you get the whole body to adopt this cellular change you just put into this? So the interesting thing is that it is working regionally. So the FDA just approved, not just, but earlier last year, a CRISPR treatment for an eye condition, for a vision condition, which means that they've been able to now make it work localized. And this is now being used on humans. What isn't understood yet is, again, something like what we just talked about with cardiovascular disease. If I'm telling somebody that they have a bad endothelial, you can't just fix it here. The entire endothelial head to toe has to be fixed. So how do you get the body to adopt? That's kind of the next step. When that happens, that's when I'm going to be jumping in and saying that chronic disease is obsolete. We're going to use that. We're waiting for that.
I mean, exciting day when that comes. And in the meantime, you guys are pioneering a way that people can take control of their health. And I love that. I absolutely love it. Kashif, this has been such a cool, informative interview. And we are at time. But as you know, I ask all of my guests a single question, and that is, what is your biggest helping, that one most important piece of information you'd like somebody to walk away with after hearing our conversation today?
I think people need to understand that chronic disease is a choice. It's not taken for granted. It's not, oh, my family has heart disease, my family has breast cancer, and then you wait to see. the understanding of why disease happens is completely off. What your family had was risk. And then they had wrong environment, nutrition, and lifestyle loads that caused the risk to manifest. So if you understand what those things are, then all of a sudden disease becomes optional. You can truly decide, diabetes, cardiovascular, all this stuff, it becomes your choice to have it or not have it. And that to me is so clear because I've done it myself. I've reversed the 6 or 7 conditions I've had, and it's been, almost 5 years now, and they have not come back.
Amazing. So you've gone through this journey. It's worked for you. You built an incredible business around it. And now you're helping people all over the world. Kashif, tell us how people can jump in on that themselves. Tell us where people can find out about this online.
Sure. It's thednacompany.com. So thednacompany.com. And the test is called the 360. So it's the 360 report. We have other programs you'll see as you get there. There's some people that say, hey, I just want my DNA test and I want to learn. There's some people that say, no, I need to lose 10 pounds, or my mother had breast cancer and I want to avoid it. And so we have coaching programs that people can get into to actually help them implement the findings. And then we have this deep dive executive program, which is a higher, sticker price, which we've done with like professional athletes, Hollywood celebrities, etc., Fortune 500 CEOs that are saying, rip my genetic code apart and build me back together again. I don't have a particular problem. I just don't want any problems.
Right.
So those are also available, but I would say just start with getting your code, get the test done, understand who you are, how you're wired. There's so much information in there. And the last thing I'll say is what we actually provide is 6 systems that we think, after researching 7,000 people, these are the 6 things that everybody needs to know. It's cardiovascular, diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, mood and behavior, everything about the brain. If I had your DNA report in my hand, I don't ever need to meet you to understand your personality. Are you a procrastinator? Are you reward seeking? Are you wired to be a doctor or an accountant? It's all genetically driven. Diet, nutrition. So what is your body meant to eat? Hormones and fitness. So body type. There's so many people struggling with plateaus of I can't lose weight, I can't put on muscle. We understand why those things happen. Skin, hair, etc. How your hormones drive your body. Cellular health, so inflammation, detox, that core cellular health, which is the root cause of disease. And then the last one is sleep. There's some people that can't fall asleep, some people can't stay asleep, some people wake up feeling like crap. All that stuff is genetically driven. So these 6 things, which are in the report, sort of will allow you to become that optimized version of yourself. So one thing we wanted to ensure that for your listeners, we offered them, a discount. Well, first of all, thank you for listening. We appreciate your time, and we honor that you spent time with us. So rather than going direct to the website and paying the full price, go to thednacompany.com/TDH. So thednacompany.com/TDH. And you'll have at checkout, you'll see when you get to checkout, there'll be a discount there for you. So we want to make sure, thank you for listening. So we're going to add that in there for you.
Very generous, very awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. If you're on a treadmill or running, and hopefully you're doing the right exercise for you, we got you covered. We'll have links in the show notes at thedailyhelping.com for everything that Kashif and I have been talking about. Well, Kashif, this has been awesome, and I am so excited about the work you're doing and what's going to come next. Thank you so much for coming on The Daily Helping.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. This was awesome.
Absolutely, it was. And I also want to thank each and every one of you who took time out of your busy day to listen to our conversation today. If you like what you heard, go give us a follow on Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review, because that is what helps other people find the show. But most importantly, go out there. I'm going to say that again. Go out there today and do something nice for someone else, even if you don't know who they are, and post it in your social media feeds using the hashtag #MyDailyHelping, because the happiest people are those that help others.